So that block scope thing really is extremely important and is one of the major changes we saw from ES5 to ES6. Other changes include syntax features which we haven't learned yet, so you will learn them, of course, throughout the course. One other major difference between var and let, which also is yet another reason to use let and const instead of var, is how JavaScript actually read and initialized variables created with var versus how it does that for variables and constants created with let and const. Here's a short example. Let me comment this out and go down there. Let's write some new code so all the other code won't run. And let's write some code here where I console log username, so a variable which I have never created here. And I then, below that log, create username and set this equal to max or whatever you want. Would you expect that this code works? Please note that I'm using var. Now maybe you do because I'm using var and you already learned that var was quite different from let and const, but let's give it a try. So let's reload this page and you see I don't get an error, but I do get undefined here. Now that's interesting. We don't print max, but we print undefined. Now let me change this to let or const, doesn't matter. And now reload this page. Now we get an error. Cannot access username before initialization. So with let and const we get an error, with var we don't. Now why is that? Well, JavaScript has a special feature called hoisting, which in the end means that the JavaScript engine, the browser, when it loads your script, goes over your entire script and it does things like look for functions, which it then automatically loads and registers so that you can write functions below the code where you actually use them. That's something I covered earlier in the course. It does the same for variables. And for variables created with var, it actually pulls this variable declaration to the beginning of your file. So that's what the browser does invisibly. And then just leaves your initialization, so where you assign a value down there where you really wrote the code. So invisibly, the browser does this. Now it does not only do that for var, but also technically for let and const. This hoisting concept also exists. But there, the browser doesn't initialize this variable to undefined. It just kind of declares it, but assigns no initial value at all. And therefore you get this error that there has been no initialization. For var, this is different. There, the browser pulls this up and also assigns an initial value of undefined so that you get no error message, but you have an undefined value here. Now that's one difference, and it's not necessarily an advantage that you could do that with var, because it really leads to a code that's harder to understand. If I'm a developer and I'm reading your code, and let's say you have more code in there, so the declaration is way at the bottom of the file, and I find this line, I as a developer might be wondering, wait, where is username coming from? I didn't see that thus far in the file. And of course, knowing JavaScript, I'm aware that it could be defined somewhere below, but why would you do that? That's really hard to understand. You have to dig through the entire file to find out what's in username. So it's much clearer if you are forced to declare a variable before you start using it, so that you're forced to move your declaration at the top. And of course, you could do that with var and older versions of JavaScript, but you weren't forced to do it. With let and const, you actually are. So that's an advancement. This worked in the past with var, and it still works today with var, of course, but it doesn't work today with let and const.